simplifying fractions. Typically in math, no matter how big the numbers get or what we're working with, after you're done with your fraction type answer, you want to try and simplify it. What's the smallest version of that fraction that we can do, okay? So when we're trying to simplify fractions like this, you're asking yourself, what is a common factor between both my numerator and my denominator, okay? You're searching for a common factor, which means that you can divide both of these numbers by that same factor and get a beautiful whole number at the end, okay? So right here, I know that I can divide 5 divided by 5 and get a perfect 1. I also know I can divide 10 divided by 5 and get a perfect 2. So I know I found my common factor and now I have a simplified fraction. Your goal is finding that common factor where you divide both parts of the fraction by the same number to get a perfect new smaller number at the end. Now let's make these numbers a little bit bigger. And sometimes the tough part about this type of problem is what is the common factor? And what's the biggest common factor? So sometimes you're gonna have to do this a couple times. So I noticed that these are both even numbers since they end in 4 and 6, and all even numbers are divisible by 2. So I'm gonna try to start by dividing both by 2. 24 divided by 2 is 12. 36 divided by 2 will be 18, okay? Now we've got to ask ourselves, what can I divide both of these numbers by, okay? Now what can I divide both 12 and 18 by? Well, I notice they're both still even, so I know I can divide by 2 again. Any number that ends in 2, 4, 6, or 8 is divisible by 2. 12 divided by 2 is 6. 18 divided by 2 is 9. Now maybe we got to keep going. Can we divide 6 and 9 by the same exact number and get perfect whole numbers? Well, I know 2 doesn't work because I'll get a decimal if I use the 9. But what about the number 3? 6 divided by 3 is 2. 9 divided by 3 is 3. So there's our final answer. I ended up having to do 1, 2, 3 rounds of this if you weren't able to think of the biggest common factor. As if I go back to my original problem, we can get to that same answer a couple different ways. Maybe at the start of the problem, I realized, oh, both 24 and 36, they're divisible by the number 6. Divide by 6, divide by 6. 24 divided by 6 is 4. 36 divided by 6 is 6. And now I notice both 4 and 6 are even numbers, which means I can divide them by 2. And once again, I get 2/3. With fractions, there's a lot of different ways to do this based on how big of a common factor you can find. But your goal is trying to find a number that you can divide both the top and bottom by and get a smaller number. Divide by the same number to keep getting it smaller and smaller until you can't anymore.